If this is your first time joining Jamp for a webinar, welcome. If you've been on one of our webinars before, welcome back. My name is Kat and I'm part of the Jamp team. I'll be hosting today's session. Before we get started, let's look at today's agenda. And buckle up, we've got a lot to cover. First, I'm going to provide a quick 2-minute intro on Jamp for those who are new in working with us. Then we're going to review Apple's deployment solutions and how they tie in with Jamp, creating a strong foundation for Apple device security. Then we're going to go into today's common security misconceptions and spend some time talking about deployment, Apple IDs, encryption, binding devices, and endpoint security. And not only will we talk about the misconceptions, but we'll provide our findings and best practices to help. We'll work to answer questions throughout the presentation. I ask if you have questions as we move along, feel free to add them in the Q&A box. Let's get started. A little about us. Jamp was founded 19 years ago with one goal: to empower people through technology. And we do that today by helping organizations be successful with Apple. We are here to help elevate and enhance the Apple experience in the workplace for employees and IT. We focus exclusively on supporting Apple hardware. And by Jamp focusing solely on Apple devices, this allows our customers to have best-in-class support, more MDM features that speak directly to the Apple platform, and ultimately this has given us a 96% customer retention rate. More than 50,000 organizations rely on us each day to help manage over 20 million and counting Apple devices globally. Being the world leader in Apple management, we're supporting from small businesses all the way up to the world's largest banks, tech companies, enterprise and government organizations. We have workflows to support organizations of any size, regardless of their Apple footprint. So whether you may have 5 devices or 5,000, we have ways to help. And this is our overall product portfolio. We have Jamf Now supporting our small, medium business markets. Jamf School is our solution for education. And of course, JAMF Pro, our solution, which is top rated for Apple management. Alongside it now are Jamf Protect for endpoint security and Jamf Connect for identity management and security. And then at the bottom, we have Jamf Nation, which is our online community for Apple admins. It's free to join and a great mind share. A major benefit our customers find in Jamf is our history and commitment to something we call same-day support. For 9 years running, Jamf has delivered same-day support for new Apple operating systems, macOS, iPadOS, iOS, and tvOS the day they are released. With Jamf, it is easy to kick off a mass operating system upgrade across your entire Apple fleet. We not only have easy same-day support readily available for our customers, but we also offer betas as well, so you can test it in your own environment. So in summary, here's what same-day support looks like with Jamf. You don't need to worry about the MDM connection breaking or perhaps building packages to make your system same-day compatible. I like to think that also if an employee upgrades on accident, it's a non-issue. Or perhaps if you have to pause the availability of a new operating system, you can delay the operating system upgrades for up to 90 days so your team can take time to test and validate before making the OS available to everyone. Essentially, you can update on your schedule and what is best for you and your organization. Now that you've learned about us, let's dive into today's topic. While there may be several misconceptions out there, these are the 5 misconceptions we'll cover for today's session. You should approach Mac security the same way as you would Windows security. Apple IDs are for consumers. Enrollment methods and securing devices are the same across all platforms. You must bind your Macs, and you need additional encryption software for the Mac. As we think about where these misconceptions stem from, in working with so many organizations, most of these misconceptions stem from a strong background with Windows devices. And it's understandable. It's what most people know, have the most experience with, and ultimately people compare to what they know. But you may find yourself perhaps struggling with securing Apple devices as you try to apply Windows practices to them. And that's because there are unique platform differences. At the core, paint a picture of these differences. This is what we get when we map it out. We know that no matter what platform, we need to provision, encrypt, apply a management framework. But as we start to contrast, we see that it's very different for each platform. So idealistically, would perhaps one MDM be great, or trying to apply the Windows practice to Apple devices be great? Of course, but what we're finding is one size doesn't necessarily work and one size doesn't fit all. So based off of what we're seeing here as we start to paint this picture. So we want to make sure that we can provide an experience and dispel some of these misconceptions when we start to work towards the Apple platform. And one of the unique platform differences that plays a role in security are Apple's deployment solutions. They also provide resolution to a lot of the misconceptions we'll be chatting about. So in my opinion, security starts here for Apple devices. At its core, it starts with Apple's deployment solutions. A quick snapshot of Apple's deployment solutions are Apple Business Manager for business organizations and Apple School Manager for education. They are both made up of automated device enrollment and the volume purchasing of apps and books. These two solutions are really where security starts. And this solution as a whole is unique to the Apple platform for organizations to use to leverage all of these wonderful features that will play a role in the organization's security to the Apple platform, and to enable management and additional security features from the time the device is first turned on. So if you're unfamiliar or need to brush up, feel free to go to business.apple.com or school.apple.com for more info, as we'll reference as part of the deployment solutions throughout the presentation today. A unique platform difference starts with how the Apple devices communicate and receive commands. All Apple devices talk to Apple's push notification service, or APNS for short. Whether the device is managed or not, all Apple devices talk to it. This is how we get app updates, notifications, text messages. They all communicate through Apple's secure service in the cloud. When the device is enrolled, no matter how it's enrolled, and it talks to both JAMF Pro and Apple Server to get the MDM profile and any changes. Again, this is unique to Apple devices, and often there's a misconception on how deployment is. Now that you've learned who Jamp is and have a high-level understanding of Apple's deployment solutions, let's start working through and chatting about the security misconceptions and putting things together. So let's start with misconception number one. The approach in deployment and securing devices is virtually the same across platforms. And as we saw just a few moments ago, there are already differences. Oftentimes I've seen organizations perhaps deploying devices by lining them up one by one, manually going through each setup step, or perhaps trying to upload an image, and mainly because they may be treating them as they would a consumer device, or that's a process they follow for their Windows devices. So the problem is, by not properly deploying the Apple devices, it will not only take up a lot of time, but could lead to huge security gaps. When deployed properly, Apple device security can enhance on many levels. So let's talk more about this. This is a common example of a traditional provisioning workflow. IT at some point will manually touch and configure the device. That may stem from a Windows workflow, perhaps, but essentially if you're unboxing those devices one by one or not using Apple Business Manager, it's recommended that the approach we're going to show you is what you go with. So if we combine what we have learned, this example shows a Mac for the Apple device provisioning journey, but the concept applies to iOS devices as well. The goal for provisioning a Mac, or the architecture of the setup, would look like this. The device gets powered on, checks into Apple's push notification service, just as all devices do. It recognizes that this device is being managed by an organization via Jamf because it is also enrolled with Apple Business Manager. And then it applies the Jamf settings over the air to the device. So in our workflow, Jamf is the glue, and it is provisioned at the time it is first being turned on. And this is best for brand new devices out of the box using Apple Business Manager and Jamf Pro. If you have existing devices, we have ways to get them set up as well, ways to secure them, and there may be ways to potentially back enroll them into Apple Business Manager. But for now, let's see this in action. So to showcase what we saw, we have Apple Push Notifications Service and Apple Business Manager. We're using an iOS device for this example. I'll share a Mac OS later on. But this device was opened and unboxed by the end user. They chose their language, connected to Wi-Fi, and it made that connection and recognized that Jamp is now configuring the device. And what we're seeing here are customizations made by IT. And these can be configurations of permissions, restrictions, apps, and essentially it's being provisioned and set up over the air. And because it went through this enrollment method, through automated device enrollment, it's very key for security, and the device became supervised. And you might be asking, what is supervision? So supervision is incredibly important. It used to be only for iOS devices, and as of recent, it's for Macs as well. Think of Jamf giving you admin rights over your Apple devices, but when a device has been supervised and purchased through Apple Business Manager, it unlocks an additional layer of admin rights and security features that become available in Jamf. So essentially, I like to think it changes the DNA of the device, saying, hang on, an organization owns this device, not the employee that's using it, and therefore the organization should have more admin rights over this device. So if you want to make sure the MDM profile perhaps can never be removed by an employee, or an employee signs in with an Apple ID and you don't want to get locked out, Supervision helps unlock some of these features. So let me show you some of these additional features that get unlocked. So here we are looking at the JAMF Pro interface, and what we notice is there are plenty of restrictions. So as we see here, if we see it says supervised, if the device is enrolled through Apple Business Manager, you will now have access to some of these features as we scroll through here, and it says supervised. So if you want to manage AirDrop, perhaps, some of the new device setup, iCloud backup, erase all content and settings. Maybe you don't want employees to have access to that. These are all things that you can have access via supervision. So we're seeing here just quite a few additional features and additional security admin rights get unlocked because of how the device was enrolled. I didn't list all of them here, but here are a few key features or a short list that require supervision to get unlocked. So in all, how you enroll and set up your Apple devices from deployment not only impacts the time spent to streamline setup and make your life easier, but it significantly impacts your security abilities over devices unique to Apple. So this ties actually nicely with our next misconception. Apple IDs are challenging, and the original intent of them was meant for personal use, and organizations tried to leverage them for business use, but perhaps initially they just weren't built that way. So while they were a challenge at one time, they don't have to be. So let's explore this a bit more and understand how it plays a role in security. So a few common Apple ID workflows that you might be using and unknowingly don't realize that they could pose gaps in security or lead to potential issues. Reimbursing employees for app purchases, downloading free apps, maybe one Apple ID on several devices. Maybe you're asking your employees for their personal Apple ID passwords. And each of these have some kind of flaw that could create a security gap. So most organizations don't realize that perhaps by reimbursing employees for apps or having them just download a free app, they're actually giving the employee not only ownership of that app, but the data in that app as well. So if they have apps with company data or client data and they leave the org, chances are they might take that information with them on accident, creating security. A newer solution that I want to bring to your attention as well. So we can take it a step further now with managed Apple IDs. And this gives people the balance between their personal Apple IDs and secure the main integrity of a company Apple ID. Managed Apple IDs are accounts designed specifically for businesses that enable access to key Apple services. Unlike regular Apple IDs, managed Apple IDs are owned and managed by each organization, including password resets and role-based administration. Announced at WWDC 2019, you can also now federate your Azure AD instance with Apple Business Manager. This will automatically create an institutionally controlled Apple ID for your users. So this makes it so much easier for admins. But just know that the Apple ID is just what you would use for a normal Apple ID, for just controlled by the organization. So you can use it for iCloud, you get content through the App Store, be assigned books, but it is not designed for login. So I always like to let people know that, but again, there's lots of benefits, like allowing the user to bring their own device to a company and they have 2 iCloud accounts for their device. one personally and one institutionally. So if you want to learn more about this, feel free to check out some of the Apple support articles. So this is one workflow. The other workflow could be maybe you want to avoid them and you might be asking, hang on, you can avoid Apple IDs? The answer is yes, to a degree. And here's one of the other workflows to make it easier. So going back to Apple Business Manager, at deployment, we spent time talking about that stage, but for the volume purchasing of apps and books, you can securely deploy apps to a device with JAMF Pro. So you can do it securely and also independent of an Apple ID. So when you sign up for this service, think of it as creating a company Apple ID or one Apple ID to rule them all, as I like to put it. And it's creating that company Apple ID to allow organizations to not only easily distribute apps, but maintain ownership of the app's company or client data in those apps. So whether you choose to have managed Apple IDs or perhaps this for your company Apple ID or a combination of both, they don't have to be hard. It will be hard if you try to apply the consumer route. So I want to show you how this looks. So what we're seeing here is the JAMF Pro interface once again, and we integrate directly with Apple's volume purchasing of apps and books. So maybe I want to deploy Box to everybody or a specific user. I would search for that in the App Store face here. And I would select the app, and it's a free app, but again, I want to make sure that I have ownership of that application, and I can essentially categorize it. I can make sure it automatically updates. I can put it in self-service, which is our self-help tool, or I can automatically put it out there for the employees to just get a notification. And if they ever leave, I can remove the app when the MDM profile is removed, just making sure that everything is 100% good on my end from a security standpoint. So we're seeing here the admin console here. Now, if we go over to the user device, you can again put it in self-service, or we can prompt the user for the install. Here we're showing a prompt for the install. So it says app installation. It's notifying the employee, hey, we're going to install and manage the Box app for you, and it's from the App Store. Your iTunes account will not be charged. And why? Because they don't own that application. So also, as we notice, it's just coming down from the cloud. It's not asking them for an Apple ID because they don't own the app, and it's tied to that company Apple ID through the volume purchasing of apps and books. So this is great for security and a great way to leverage JAMF Pro. A feature I want to highlight with the volume purchasing of apps and books and JAMF and Apple IDs is called Managed Open In, and this essentially controls the flow of data between apps, managed mail destinations, and ensures corporate data is only used in corporate apps. So we're securely deploying the app with volume purchasing of apps and books with JAMF, but then with this, and if the device is supervised, it's creating a sandbox around the work data. So if they have personal apps, that's fine. This is for company-owned apps only. And at the end of the day, I care more about that data than anything else. So currently, I also wanted to share as well, there's another feature that was just recently announced by Apple at WWDC 2021, and that's managed pasteboard settings. So you would then have the ability to apply the same restrictions to the copy paste functionality, meaning that information copied from corporate apps cannot be pasted in unmanaged apps or the reverse. So more information, I'm sure we'll find out on that. So that really wraps up Apple IDs. Let's talk about the next one, another misunderstanding with Apple devices around third-party encryption. And this is very common for the Windows platform. Usually you put third-party encryption software, but it is simply not required for Mac and iOS. Why? Because it's included and built in. So sometimes the instinct is, oh, it's included. Is it too generic? Will it not meet our needs? And with Apple, it's simply not the case, as their operating system and software is designed for it. So let's look at this for both Mac and iOS security encryption. So iOS and iPadOS devices, they essentially use a file encryption methodology of data protection, 56-bit encryption. It's hardware-based with a passcode. VPN is also built in as well, and with Jamp you can even use a feature called per app VPN, making some apps only work on VPN. And then of course Touch ID. So this is really how it's for iOS at a hardware level, and that's really something that you particularly don't need to have anything additionally added for encryption on iOS. Now for Mac, whether you're using an Intel-based Mac that has a T2 chip, or you've recently adopted M1, encryption is also built into the Mac, and you don't need third-party encryption tools because they leverage File Vault 2. So when you think of Windows counterparts, again, it's normal to add encryption, but with Mac, it's built right into the operating system, and it starts also with that chip in the hardware. So no matter what, whether you have M1 or you have an Intel-based chip, here at Jamf, we can support either. So since Apple has encryption software for Mac OS, we integrate right into that and allow features to help with that. So we can not only help with enabling File Vault 2, but we can securely store and remotely issue the keys. So here's a few callouts, but I really want to show you. So here's JAMF Pro again, the interface, and this is the latest updates. So we can require File Vault 2, we can have a personal recovery key or an institutionally one. We can automatically encrypt the devices, or if it's not encrypted with our policies, we can encrypt over the air. We can redirect the recovery keys to the JAMF Pro server. So we're building off of the native Apple tools to ensure encryption is easy for you and allowing you to really elevate the experience and make sure you have what you need. So let's move on to the next misconception. Binding Macs is a must. And I hear this time and time again. And it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on the call, but Active Directory is a directory service that Microsoft developed for the Windows platform for domain networks to authenticate and authorize users and computers on a Windows domain, assigning and enforcing security policies. So it will work in tandem with MDM for more identity access via the device. Most organizations are trying to figure out that balance between security and identity for logins, and especially with more organizations enabling remote work and supporting field employees, we're really relying on identity management to help. Now, this workflow has been great for Windows devices. It was built for Windows, so the process is seamless for Windows. And again, it's applying Windows, and I just want to see how many times I can say it's a process for Windows. So the issue is, and the misconception is, we have to apply this process and bind Macs. But what you find is when we are applying that process for Windows, it's creating a problem. So you or your end users, perhaps you might be getting locked out of devices and having time-consuming tickets, and that's a direct result of Macs being bound to the domain and the passwords not syncing. And this creates an issue on the Mac. I like to think of it as a translation problem. It's trying to translate a Windows process for Apple, and it can't. So here at Jamf, we recognize that gap, and we want to solve that problem by syncing the local passwords to cloud identity providers. And this is really important for anyone binding or looking to not bind to AD, and there are workflows to support both. But this really brings us to the question to bind or not bind. And really back in the day, binding was the workflow for identity management. It got us off the hook with the rest of the IT team who was managing Windows. But at the same time, as we just pointed out, it can cause some issues. So what do? Well, we want to have that balance for identity security, but at the same time, it's again a process for Windows devices. So our recommendation is don't bind. There's no reason really for the Macs to be bound to AD except for very specific on-premise computer, lab type, network accounts. So even on Windows, even for Windows devices, Microsoft is even advising people to move to Azure. For more information on that, don't take our word for it. Feel free to check out what was said at WWDC 2020 around this and to basically how to avoid binding. And at a high level, if we're not going to bind and we're moving away from on-premise servers, we need to replace what Active Directory was giving us. So now that most people are in the cloud, directory services are handled by cloud identity providers services. Essentially, we need to get the user information and attach that to the Apple devices, and that includes group membership. So Jamf Connect will give us that central account management for client devices that binding used to give us when we were perhaps in the office. So JAMF Pro plus Azure Conditional Access lets us protect our cloud resources and make sure that, for example, the only way to get into Salesforce is to access it from an IT managed device. So if we think of modern identity management, these are the initial steps, and we have additional webinars that go into further detail, but if you're looking to not bind, this would be our recommendation and steps to follow. And then we would essentially leverage Jamf Connect. So we recognized people were binding in the marketplace but needed to replace it. And again, those were the gaps we noticed. So that's why we have Jamf Connect, to give IT admins the ability to easily provision Apple users from cloud identity services with multi-factor authentication. Simply stated, it's a way to easily set up, manage, and authenticate users on a Mac with cloud identity provider of choice. And again, it's with the cloud. So unlike Kerberos and SSO extensions, the now legacy Enterprise Connect or our open source tool Nomad, Jamf Connect must have a cloud identity provider. And this really matters because for that Apple experience, and again, to avoid binding and any mishaps there, but also have identity, we want to augment and build upon the native local user account experience features like Keychain and File Vault 2, again, the encryption. So we integrate and help there, and helping organizations be successful with those tools. So if we're not going to bind, I really want to put this all together. Earlier, I showed you an iOS example. I want to show you a just-in-time account creation in action. So we'll use Microsoft Azure as our identity provider this time, and we can leverage Microsoft Hello Style passwordless login. After authenticating on our device, we type in our Azure password to keep the local user account password in sync with Azure. If our local user already had an account on this machine, we can merge them together, but we're going to create a brand new account. So this section of the account setup is sped up, as you can tell, but you're basically being presented with the account creation steps of the macOS admins, and they chose not to skip that. So finally, we get to the Finder, and our user is ready to work. And our user here is Sean, and because Sean was a member of the IT team, he got an administrator account on this machine. The Jamf Connect menu bar keeps our local password in sync. We've got the Azure password safely stored in the macOS system keychain. So if we simulate what happens if a password gets out of sync, let's change the local account password to something else, like 12345 for now. Within 15 minutes, Jamf Connect will check the password against Azure, but then we hurry it along with Connect. So when we authenticate to Azure, Jamf Connect notifies the user that the password is out of sync and asks for the current local password and updates the local password to match Azure. So just-in-time account creation is useful to IT staff to make one-off changes to computers, or maybe just someone needs to borrow a computer in a hurry. So the new user gets their own account on the Mac, keeping Sean's information safe on his account. So essentially, we are handling that translation process. And then number 5, let's bring it home with the final misconception, endpoint security. And before we dive into this one, I really want to say Apple does an amazing job with a secure operating system. The OS includes so much and does so much, but at the end of the day, there are common misconceptions around that. As we mentioned, supporting maybe Mac security the same way as you would Windows. Maybe some people think still Macs can't get malware, which was true about 10 years ago. Native Mac security tools don't work, and that's just simply not true. Apple has so many great things built in that really help, like Gatekeeper to sign apps, XProtect as well. They're really wonderful to just make sure that you have what you need. System integrity, making sure that protected files can't get overwritten or tampered with. So, and then of course, deploying a security solution is difficult, and that's simply not true as well. But at the end of the day, you know, if we look at endpoint security and what we might consider and where these misconceptions stem from, a lot of them stem from Windows forward solutions. And then of course for the Mac, a lot of it's built in. And I know there might be exceptions to some of the things you're seeing here on the right. But again, we've got a lot of things in here to just really be already built in. So Apple has a very strong operating system. But at the same time, as Apple has adopted more of the market share, or people have gotten more skilled perhaps in trying to get into a Mac. I mean, if you have ill intent and you want to try to get in, they're going to try to find a way, right? So an attacker is going to try to find it. And we've even seen in the recent years some attackers creating malware specific to the Mac. and that can pose a problem. Most tools are focused on Windows, and why? Well, because Windows solutions have been around the longest. And if they're trying to also, find something on the Windows side, it might be missing perhaps things on the Mac. So again, PCs have historically been a popular choice over Macs, and Mac adoption rises. More companies and might need security tools that focus more on the Mac. And again, we recognize that, and that's why we have Jamf Protect. We know Apple has an amazing solution as far as their operating system, but either perhaps it may not always be bulletproof. An end user might even accidentally do something on their own, or you might just need to report on it. Hey, Gatekeeper caught this today, or hey, the operating system caught this and we want to make sure we can report on it, or oh, there's some suspicious behavior here, or how do we make sure that we can respond immediately to anything that might be trying to impact the machine. So this is where we're really helping in these major areas to prevent issues and security problems for the Mac. So again, it's already a strong platform, but we want to make sure that you're prepared. So when we think of where Jamf Protect supports and all of our other solutions, this is really where we help organizations when it comes to their Mac security. So in the end, you really need to have a Mac-focused security solution to go make sure that it is reporting properly on Mac-specific threats or malicious intent for the Mac. So let's talk about what the path to success looks like when we bring this all together. Essentially, you want to evaluate your current infrastructure, and did you experience any of these misconceptions? Enroll in Apple Business Manager if you haven't already, and then get started with Jamf and see how we can help. Then you'll want to work with us to create MDM and security profiles that meet your needs and start enrolling devices. And in a nutshell, when we think of security, we talked about all three of our solutions today and how they help alleviate with some of these misconceptions and where we provide support. But this is our stack at a high level and where we can help. So we want to make sure that as you work with your Apple devices, from the time that device is deployed to the time it's retired, we're here to help from a management, security, and identity perspective to support in each area of the platform and alleviate any misconceptions or problems that we talked about today. Which brings us back to the beginning. In the end, we're here to help organizations succeed with Apple, and we want Apple technology to be a first-class citizen in your environment. We understand that while there may be misconceptions, it's understandable where they stem from, but being Apple experts for so long, and several of us also have some Windows experience here, we are here to help your organization. We've helped so many others with their Apple devices too. So in the end, if you have any questions, or maybe there's a misconception we didn't cover today, or you want to learn more about something we discussed, please feel free to email us at info@jamf.com. Or if you want to put some of these misconceptions and best practices to the test, let us know if you wish to try any of our solutions out. And at this time, I want to thank you for joining us. We scratched the surface today, very high level on some things. And I hope you learned something new, and we'll catch you at the next session.